talk to you a little bit today about skills. So one of the things that's really become apparent when we start to talk about digital transformation or we talk about DevOps is that there is a different set of skills perhaps for those of us particularly that have been in IT for a long time that we need to groom. And it isn't whether you need to go from waterfall to agile or you need to learn lean or continuous delivery or the myriad of other tools. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But we're really going to talk about upskilling, cross-skilling, skills modernization programs. Anybody hearing about that? Is your organization starting to focus a little bit on skills? Right, a little bit? Right, I hear all sorts of interesting and different terms about skilling. Right, not killing, skilling. And what it's going to take to cross into the transformation space. Whether you're new to IT, whether you've been in IT a long time like me, there's always a skill, but there's also a little bit of a different twist on skilling, whereas before we might have been pigeonholed into a silo that says, I am a developer. Today you may need to be a test-driven developer, right? So there is really a different twist on how we skill. You probably know that the talent market in IT is exploding, right? Everyone is hiring. And I would tell you that 10 years ago, getting a degree in IS meant you were probably going to work in fast food, right? So there was a glut of people coming out of university with MIS, computer information science, software development skills, and there weren't enough jobs. Today, how many of you are hiring? Right, it's not a shortage, right? There's a big, big talent shortage that's associated with that. So let me tell you a little bit about me, and I'll tell you a little bit about the DevOps Institute. So as Nirmal said, I am the CEO, I'm the co-founder of the DevOps Institute. We are the Association of DevOps Professionals. Okay, so as DevOps has emerged, we understand that there's a community of practice around DevOps. And professionals like to hang out with professionals. Professionals also like continuing education, and so we do accredit 7 certifications around DevOps, including DevSecOps, continuous delivery, testing, leadership, things like that. So if you're interested in learning more about our certifications, I won't tell you too much more about that. Please go to our website. Joining the DevOps Institute is free, so please also go to our website and become a member. We have a job board, we have a Slack channel, there's some other assets that are available to you as a member. And for now, membership is free. Sometime in the future that may change, but we really want this to be a continuous learning community, and we want this to be an open community. We were founded in 2015. I've got a bunch of credentials I'm not going to really go into, but my history is in operations. So how many of you are in operations? Oh, I think that requires some software. So if you're an ops person, you get to raise your hand and hopefully get some socks. Tammy's really good at she's been practicing, right?
I gotta go further.
It's got to come to this side. Come on, we have ops people on this side.
Alright, here we go.
Okay, so ops people, put your hands out. How many of you are dev? Oh man, Tammy, you got trouble here.
How many are DevOps?
Alright.
DevOps?
Should go back here.
Okay. Anybody SRE, Starbucks Reliability Engineering? Anyone SRE? Oh, we got a couple of SREs. You guys are on the cusp, right, of the coolest stuff. All right, last one. Who's security? Poor Tammy, I got her running like crazy, right?
She knows I need my steps in.
All right, so while Tammy is playing sock peddler, it's like going to the ball game, so we should have got one of those shooters.
Yeah, we should have had
shoot sock heads. If you've been in IT for any period of time, you know that IT is a system of systems. And so if we start to look at kind of the evolution of our systems, we understand that it starts with agile, well, waterfall to agile. How many of you are doing agile software development? Whole bunch, right? Anybody doing waterfall? It's okay. Okay, awesome, right? Thank you for really being transparent about that. But when agile started to emerge into the IT space, it was done in isolation with a whole bunch of developers that became Scrum Masters or product owners, and Scrum teams were developed, and it became one of the 7 kingdoms. Everybody understand that reference? Right, one of the 7 kingdoms. right? Then we also now kind of moved into the release management, continuous delivery, continuous deployment state, under which you might see some ITSM. Anybody been doing ITIL? A little bit of ITIL? Anybody doing continuous delivery? Right. So you start to see kind of the second of the systems, which is it comes out of the Scrum team, right? Whatever the shippable product is, comes out of the Scrum teams, goes into continuous delivery, whether it's automated, fully, partially automated, some manual, securities in there, build, test, deploy, right, and into production. And then the button either presses itself or the button is pressed, and we go into deployment. And now we have a whole new system in post-production operations. So site reliability engineering is emerging there. If you, again, come from the ITIL space, you're probably looking at incident management, problem management, different level of configuration management, CMDB versus, say, configuration management, pre-production. And each of these systems has developed its own language, its own set of tools, its own set of practices. And in many cases, that was done in isolation. So we really didn't engage in systems thinking, all right? So those of you that maybe are post-production, is post-production? Ooh, not too many, right? Pre-production, right? Ops, really pre-production, dev, right? Really kind of operated on your own little kingdoms, right? So it felt a little bit Game of Thrones, right? It felt a little bit like, you know, I'm lean, I'm agile, I'm ITIL, I'm COVID, I'm a lot of tools, automation. And so we became a system of systems. And the problem on a skilling side is that from the skills that emerge from these systems were not cross-functional skills, right? So the first time somebody post-production sees the Agile Manifesto and it goes, oh, we value individuals and interactions over process and procedure, process and tools. The ITIL people, I come from the ITIL space, the ITIL people go, whoa, wait a minute, everything I've been done has just been completely invalidated. Now, if you're going to look at systems, you also have to then apply systems thinking. And so one of the key core values of DevOps is to start thinking like a system, right? And systems thinking means you can't exist in a silo, right? You can't only be a developer. You can't only be a security professional. You can't only be a post-production systems administrator. You have to now become multidimensional. And so, have you heard of T-shape? Right, a lot of people have heard of T-shape. Right, so the stem of the T is your specialty, whatever your specialty is. But the top of the T is where you need to, and this is not a request, this is a requirement by your organization, need to develop breadth of knowledge across multiple disciplines, whether it's testing, whether it's coding, whether it's automation. You need to become a multidimensional professional in order to cross over into the transformation. And there's some scary statistics out there. 70% of people from my generation won't make it across the transformation. Now, maybe there's some people in this audience that are my generation. It's a little scary number, right? And it isn't even my generation, it's generation before, right? You have to be transformative in order to cross the transformation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the skills. And you know, it's interesting because I looked at the open space board and there was a great question, I don't know who asked it as a suggested topic, is what is a DevOps engineer? Is it a tools person? Is it a process person? Is it a culture person? Right? I said, I don't know who put that up there, but it was a great question. There's this mythical role called a DevOps engineer. How many of you are DevOps engineers? Right? I would bet you that if you had an open space, all of you kind of getting together, that your skill sets are not exactly aligned. Probably similar, right? But what your skill sets are, they're not exactly the same. There is no common definition of a DevOps engineer. Now, whether there should or shouldn't be, I'm not going to answer that question today, truthfully. It's not my place. Right. But I am going to talk about some skills that everybody needs to acquire, regardless of your role, and also talk about some skills that I think you should become curious about. So the first thing is value stream mapping. Anybody ever gone through a value stream mapping exercise? It's fantastic, right, Jen? I mean, it's fantastic, right? It is the greatest opportunity to get a bunch of people in a room to talk about flow. to talk about from an idea all the way through the value stream into value delivery to your customer. Not into production, by the way, value creation, because part of that mapping exercise is the definition of value. Right? So if you have not, in your organization, started to look at value stream mapping, which is a lean concept, right? I would absolutely encourage you to do some research, get some education, look online. Value stream mapping is awesome. Because part of it is also negotiation, because you're looking for waste, right? You're looking for some activities that maybe you don't know exist, some redundant activities that are occurring, and you're looking for waste. It is an amazing skill, both on the individual side, but as a capability of the organization. And if you start to look at your value stream, we start to see that question from the open space. Is the DevOps engineer a cultural person? Is it a process person? Is it an automation person? And the answer is it's all of the above. Right? Your value stream is built on all three of these people, process, and technology principles, right? The pillars of DevOps and the pillars of IT. And we also need to understand what is value to your customers, right? If I go to Starbucks as a customer, right, my value is I really want an awesome cup of coffee. Now, you're not going to make my cup of coffee for me. Right? But somewhere along the value stream, there's going to be technology that delivers that the barista can make it for me and can make it correctly time after time after time. And we can look at inventory, and we can look at that entire stream. And it's not necessarily that big. It could be really little. Right? It could be little aspects of your value stream. So please, this is a skill that everybody needs to have some familiarity with. The second is transformational leadership. Right? Anybody done any research on transformational leadership? Right? The State of DevOps Report 2017 put a really big emphasis on what it takes to be a transformational leader. Transformational leader is somebody that inspires, right? Inspires their followers. And by the way, you're all transformational leaders. Doesn't matter what your title is. Inspires their followers to have a common set of objectives, a common goal, know how to get people to march in the same direction, right? Every one of the speakers yesterday talked about Western, right? The flow of information and how we don't want to be pathological, right? In our flow. I mean, think of that word, right? It sounds a little CSI. We don't want to be pathological in our flow of information. So these are really good opportunities for you to become familiar with some of the cultural principles that are really sitting underneath DevOps. It's more than just a kind of warm, fuzzy thing. Nathan mentioned hug ops, right? It's more than hug ops. There are some real tangible opportunities to grow your cultural skills, and sometimes we're not taught those. So understanding, go up and look at the Spotify squad model. There's a couple of really great videos on how Spotify really created the squad model with tribes and guilds and chapters. And maybe that works for you, maybe it doesn't work for you, but it gives you a lot of insight into the type of skills and the type of collaboration that's associated with moving forward in a transformation. So everything's continuous, right? So we need continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, continuous testing. So absolutely, as a DevOps, woman I know calls it a DevOpsologist. And she's self-identified that way. It's kind of a cool term, even though I can't say it. But you do need to be familiar with the key practices and principles associated with continuous delivery. Now, by the way, that's not necessarily Jenkins or Red Hat or pick any of the tools. Practices and principles stand above that. So whatever automation you apply in there, it's all awesome automation, right? You have to understand the best practices and the best principles that sit above that you can apply regardless of the environment you're in or how you've built your pipeline. Now, I'm going to tell you the other thing that's important. Every one of you has to become a tester. I don't care what your job is. Starting tomorrow, if you do not have testing skills, if you do not understand the basic principles of continuous testing, that's the first skill you need to acquire. Because everything is code. Right? Everything is code. And shift left means that we start testing in development. So if you're a developer, tomorrow you become a test-driven developer. If you're a build engineer, testing, obviously. This is no longer a handoff to QA. Security, excuse me, DevSecOps, one of the principles of DevSecOps is shift security testing left. So every one of you has got to acquire testing skills, right? You may not necessarily be a full stack QA person, but everything you do is going to have some level of testing. The other thing every one of you has to learn to do is code. I am not a coder. Sorry, I confess that. You have to become a coder because everything is code. Infrastructure is code. Security is code, right? Code is code. Everything is code. SRE, I go to SRECon every year. The number one skill they're looking for in an SRE, Python. Right? It is an engineering practice. As an engineers, everybody has to learn to code. Microservices and containers, we had a really good overview from Chris yesterday, really giving us a lot of insight into what is containerization, what is microservices. So taking the big, ugly, monolithic applications and breaking it down into, bite-sized pieces is something, again, you don't necessarily have to be the one breaking it down, but you need to understand what that means because it's going to have a downstream effect on everything you do regardless of your role. So again, understand Kubernetes, to be an expert, understand how it works, what it does. Again, great presentation yesterday. Really understand the principles behind containerization so that we understand that going forward, we are not going to release once a year, right? We may be releasing once a day or once an hour because we're able to break that down. And that sounds simple, it's not so simple, right? But again, it is something that everyone in the pipeline has to have some familiarity with. And then of course, tools. Right. There is no shortage of tools, and there are some awesome tools out there. And I am not going to tell you which tool you need to have in your skill portfolio. Right? It really depends. Depends on what environment you're in, it depends what you're trying to achieve, it depends on what platforms you're on, it depends what your stack looks like. Right? But you are not exempt from understanding the categories of tools. Right, regardless of your role, you have to at least have some familiarity of what these tools are, how they deliver value in your value stream, how they may be a part of your pipeline or could be part of your pipeline. Right? Open source is not free. Everybody get that? Right? Open source is not free. So if you're building an open source pipeline or you're building an enterprise level pipeline, regardless of your role, you have to be comfortable providing input into how those tools are going to have some type of influence on your piece of that pipeline. And if you don't understand what comes before or after, again, we can't exist with blinders anymore. So if you look at this, and again, it's really a very, very short. CBA Labs puts out the periodic table of DevOps tools. Have you ever seen it? If you haven't, it's just scary, right? It's really, really scary. But again, real basic tools that you should have some familiar with, and this is really just a taste of it. But you can't say that's not part of my job, right? I'm not an automation architect, therefore I don't need to know it, right? DevSecOps, this one's really interesting. Where's the security folks, right? So a year and a half ago, the security folks kind of went, I don't think we fit in DevOps, right? Because DevOps was misnamed to be development and operations. The security folks went, what? Have you read the Phoenix Project? Anybody read the Phoenix Project? You know that guy John that walks around with the big black notebook, right? He was really on the outside of the inner cool kids circle, right? DevSecOps is trending so high right now. I was at a DevOpsDays at RSA. This past year, 1,000 people walked in that room, right, for free DevSecOps days. That's amazing, right? That's amazing. So again, even if you're not a security practitioner, you need to understand about DevSecOps because there's a cultural aspect, there's a process aspect, there's a technology aspect, and it is going to have an influence because security is going to become very, very pervasive if it isn't already in everything that you do, regardless of your role. If you're a developer, security testing is going to start really early, test-driven development. If you're an ops person, pre-production, post-production, security is going to be invasive in everything you do. So you really do need to understand what DevSecOps is. I'm not going to go through a lot of the detail here. The slides will be available to you just to give you a real high-level overview of what some of these topics are. But I'm telling you, DevSecOps is one to really pay some attention to. This one I find interesting. Where are the SREs in the room? There was a few, right? So this is fascinating to me because I come from the operations side. And so, and by the way, operations is trending really high as well, where in the early days of DevOps, it was to deployment, and then we started again. And you know, I wanted to stand on the mountain and say, hey, you know, what happens after you press the button, right? What happens in operations? And now that's starting to trend very high. There's papers coming out, there are events. A new event is being introduced called DevOpsDays, so no more no-ops. So if you're interested in all of that, you know, please reach out. But SRE really kind of launched a set of practices that didn't grow up as part of DevOps, but growing up parallel to DevOps, or maybe just a little bit behind. And I've been to 2 SRE cons, where first year it was mostly who you would expect. We would have called them unicorns in the old days. You know, the SaaS space, Silicon Valley, Google, Netflix, Shopify was there. And then you saw like Comcast and Capital One at booths at the first SRE con in the US, maybe it was the second one, right? All manned by talent acquisition, right? This year, triple the number of sponsors. Again, Bloomberg, American Express, they all had booths there, all manned by talent acquisition, right? This is just bursting. So if you are not familiar with some of the key principles of site reliability engineering, again, even if you're on the other end of the value stream, you can read the Google book for free. Google wrote a book about site reliability practices. You may not be Google, that's okay, right? But the key practices are fantastic, including for operations, which is mostly reactive, really committing about half your time to improvement. So half time reactive, half time proactive, and understanding some of the practices that sit behind it. Again, you can get the book for free, read it for free online, you can get it from Amazon. By the way, not this big, it's that big, right? That's a shocker today, right? It's like 500 pages. They just released the site reliability workbook. There's some derivative work about it. Again, really, really bubbling up as something that's emerging. I'm wondering whether it's ultimately going to be continuous operations, right? Is SRE the equivalent, right? Is it the continuation of the value stream where we have integration, delivery, deployment, testing, and now maybe continuous operations? We'll see. And then Agile Service Management. A couple of you mentioned coming from the ITIL space. Shamelessly, I will tell you I'm the author of the Agile Service Management Guide. I do come from the ITIL community. The early days, it was ITIL's dead, long live ITIL. ITIL may not be as relevant as it was before because the last time it was authored was in really 2007, 2011. New version coming out next year. But services still need to be managed. So you still need to understand change management. How many of you struggle with change management? Number one question I get asked all the time, right? How do I make change management work in a fast-paced world? If you want the answer, I'll tell you later. But understand how to make service management agile. Core principle, how much is just enough process, right? You have to figure out how much is just enough or minimum viable process. Change management is a great example of that, right? How much change management do we need for particular situations? So again, if you're interested in reading the guide, you can download it from our website. It's perfectly free. But ITSM still exists. Site reliability engineering mentions incidents. Now we have swarming and commanders and all sorts of things like that. But nothing in ITIL or IT service management is invalid. The question is, how are you doing it, right? You know, ITIL's 2,000 pages and became a little bit of sing a hymn, open the book, you know. Service management really just needs to be adapted to be more agile. And then, you know, just kind of wrapping up, there's some really good best practices out there, right? If you've not read the Jez Humble Continuous Delivery book, which is not going to speak to any tool, it's amazing, right? I mean, Jez really did a very, very good job with Dave Farley, trying to kind of understand what is continuous delivery, how does it work, what's the value. I mean, Jez says releases should be boring, right? They should be boring, they should be able to be done in the middle of the day. And you want the automation to do the repetitive tasks so that human beings can apply what human beings do best, which is higher level thinking. right? So really, really great book. If you've not read the Phoenix Project and the DevOps Handbook, anybody read the DevOps Handbook? They now just did an audio series called Beyond the Phoenix Project. John Willis and Jayne did that together. So again, I would encourage you to acquire that. And then look in the frameworks and the practices that have delivered value. I said the biggest problem we have in IT is we love our frameworks. We do, we love our frameworks. More than any other unit in the business, we love our frameworks. And unfortunately, our frameworks have also encouraged us to be loyal to particular frameworks. So I'm an Agilist, I'm an ITSM, I'm a lean person, right? And so we don't really do a lot of functionality, and the best way to be T-shaped is to understand all of this. A little bit at a time. A lot of it's self-directed. You're not going to have a manager tell you to go, read the Lean IT Guide, right? Be curious. Right? Be curious, because there's some really good stuff in there. And then be a continuous learner. The interesting thing about DevOps, and maybe it's a little frustrating, we don't have a single body of knowledge, right? There are not 5 books, chapter and verse, that you could go to that will tell you how to do DevOps. And for the last few years, I've been lucky to be in the DevOps space since 2012. Right, so in dog years, if you extrapolate that, I've been in DevOps for a really long time. There's a lot of frustration. The Phoenix Project is a great book, but it's a novel. The DevOps Handbook is a great book, right? But this space is moving so fast, and your need to acquire skills is so dynamic. There's never going to be a single body of knowledge, and there shouldn't be. We like to say at DevOps Institute, we focus on a collective body of knowledge. And by the way, this is part of the collective body of knowledge. Right? The collective body of knowledge is blogs and articles and presentations and books, and there are great books out there, but not one of them is going to tell you how to do DevOps. You gotta actually apply some higher level thinking in order to be able to do that, right? You have to be open, you have to share knowledge. If you learn something here, take it back to your organization, right? Cross skill. Teach somebody how to code if they're not a coder, and let them teach you what they're doing as well. Be curious. And I'm going to wrap up really quickly on 2 notes. The first is, we are all really lucky and blessed to be in IT today. And if you don't feel that way, when you walk out of this room, go look in the mirror, right? Where else do you have a job where you are encouraged to learn something new every single day? Not only encouraged, required. You're required to be disruptive. You're required to be innovative. You're required to keep your skills portfolio growing. Right? There's a lot of jobs out there that are not encouraging you to do that. So take advantage of that, regardless of whether you're at the beginning of your journey or you're closer to the end of your journey. Right? Nowhere else are you going to find a job where you are actually encouraged to be disruptive. Right? To be rebellious. That's a little bit scary. Right? So take advantage of that. Be a continuous learner. Go to events like this. Go up to YouTube. Go to national conferences, DevOps Enterprise Summit, Jenkins World, ChefCon. I look at Nathan when I say that. Splunk Con. I mean, there's a con. I'm going to an event next week. There are 3 conferences, same week, same locations. It's scary. So there's no shortage of opportunities for you to learn. We're moving away from what is DevOps to how do we do it. And you are the guys that are going to have to be able to do that. If you are interested in understanding from a skills acquisition, go to DevOps Institute, look at some of our certifications, see if that makes sense, become a member of the association and the community. Okay, last thing I want to end on, and unfortunately it's a little bit of a sad note, but I really want to do this. A really amazing thought leader in our space passed away this week, and some of you may know him. His name was Rob Stroud. I don't know if you know, anybody know Rob Stroud? Anybody hear of him? He was Forrester, CBA Labs, whatever. Very tragic, very sudden. Don't really want to bum you out, but if you could just collectively send up whatever way you do, just a really good thought to Rob and his family. He's been in the space a long time. I've known him 15 years. Look him up online. He was a Forrester analyst. He wrote some amazing blogs. Really just a great contributor and really tragic. So I just wanted to kind of, remind everybody that you're in a great place. Rob was a really great contributor to that. Take advantage of his thought leadership and just send a nice little aura into the universe thinking good thoughts for his family in this very difficult time. Okay, on that note, I'm going to say, go out there and learn something new. Thank you.
Thank you.